Hello and welcome to our lesson. Today we're going to go through lesson 6.05 on China's Ming and Qing dynasties. You want to make sure that you have the student guide out and ready so that you can fill it out as we go through. In this lesson, you're going to learn quite a bit about China, and we've talked about some of the Han dynasties and the Qing dynasty. We've learned about China and how it was isolated from other aspects of the world. We're going to continue with that discussion because the Ming and the Qing dynasties really kind of kept that isolation going and developed their own culture without having outside influences. After a century of hardship under Mongol rule, the Chinese overthrew the Yan dynasty, passing the mandate of heaven to the Ming dynasty. Early Ming emperors reformed government and promoted a period of remarkable artistic achievement. From their magnificent new capital in Beijing, they sent great fleets of ships to explore distant lands. When threatened with invasion in the mid-15th century, however, China turned inward, shutting itself off from the world just as other civilizations were beginning to make great advances. Our goals today are to recognize individuals and achievements of the Ming and Qing dynasties, describe the cause and results of China's isolation from the rest of the world during the 16th and 17th centuries. We're going to read Chapter 17, Section 2, which is pages 384 through 390. And then we want to make sure that we answer the questions on the student guide. We're also going to complete the activity in isolated China. And before we do that, we're going to explore the Forbidden City. Under the Ming rule, China worked hard to repair the damage the Mongols had done to their country. The second Ming emperor built the new imperial capital, a lavish compound in Beijing. Let's go ahead and get a glimpse inside the imperial enclave in Beijing that served for more than 200 years as the emperor's palace, office, and retreat. So here's the Forbidden City. This is coming up for us. The first Ming emperor to take the throne moved the imperial capital south to Nanjing and destroyed the old Mongol palaces in Beijing. The next emperor, however, built a sumptuous enclave on the site of the Mongol Yan dynasty's old imperial compound. Known as the Forbidden City, the complex served as China's imperial capital for more than 200 years. The Forbidden City was the emperor's home, office, and retreat. Spread across its 178 acres were temples, royal palaces, gardens, ponds, and elaborate ceremonial halls. Everything about it was designed to show the might of the emperor, the importance of the Ming dynasty, and the insignificance of just about everything else. So we're going to take a tour through the halls and the gardens of the Forbidden City, beginning at the south entrance, the Meridian Gate. When special visitors passed through the Meridian Gate, musicians standing in the tower above the gate played drums and bells to welcome guests. Across the white marble terrace toward the center of the city stands the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The Forbidden City has many palaces and halls, 9,999 rooms in all. In the Hall of Protective Harmony, banquets were held. The hall included a high throne where the emperor presided over gatherings. Today, this hall houses artwork such as porcelain vases, lacquered chests, and jade seals. Gardens and Hall of Earthly Peace. In the gardens of the Forbidden City, workers lit fires inside urns. Beyond the gardens is the Hall of Earthly Peace. And we can see if we enlarge these maps, it shows us where the Hall of Earthly Peace is, also called the Hall of Earthly Tranquility. You can see there's a lot of buildings. This is the north or rear gate of the Forbidden City, the Gate of Divine Might. When you pass through the Gate of Divine Might, you leave the Imperial City and enter the streets of Beijing. The Forbidden City served as China's royal center for more than 200 years. It was the political center of China until the early 1900s, when the last emperor of China's last dynasty stepped down and a new government was formed. The Forbidden City has been preserved nearly intact for centuries. Today it houses collections of artworks from the Ming and Qing dynasties and is the world's largest collection of wooden structures preserved from ancient times. You're going to need to write this word down, Ming. You see that at the bottom here, as you're going to need that when you go ahead and complete your checkpoint. Let's go through and read our chapters. Hopefully you've already downloaded the student guide and you can see here's all the information we're going to fill in as we go through the lesson and as we go through the reading. I'm not going to fill this out for you, but you need to make sure that you're answering these questions as we read. In the early 13th century, the Mongol leader Genghis Khan conquered much of China. His grandson Kublai Khan finished the job in 1279 and established the Yuan dynasty to rule China. For decades, the Chinese suffered under Mongol rule. They paid high taxes, had little say in their government, and endured terrible famines. By the middle of the 14th century, the Chinese people had had enough of foreign rule. Rebellions broke out like brush fires. Zhu Yangzheng, a peasant from southern China, led a revolt that chased out the Mongols who had long ruled the land. For his new dynasty, he chose the name Ming, which means brilliant, and brilliant it was. Zhu Yuanzhang came from the humblest origins of any Chinese emperor. His parents and brothers starved to death during a famine. Zhu joined a band of rebels battling to drive the Mongols out of China. A natural leader, Zhu quickly began to recruit followers. Again and again, he led his men to victory against the Mongols. In 1355, he assembled an army and conquered the southern Mongol city of Nanjing, which eventually became the capital. Zhu's army was just one of several competing rebel armies in China. Over the next decade, he fought more battles against Chinese rivals than against the Yuan rulers. By 1368, Zhu had defeated both the Mongols and his Chinese rivals in the south. He went on to capture the northern part of China and drove out the last Mongol emperor. He established a new dynasty, the Ming. For himself and his reign, he took the imperial title of Huangwu, which means vast military power. The Huangwu emperor built an army drawn from 2 million households obliged to provide him lifelong military service. Soon, every neighboring country from Korea to Thailand was paying tribute to China. But the new emperor was more interested in control than conquest. To have more personal control over running the empire, he did away with the office of the prime minister. To prevent rebellion, he had as many as 100,000 of his own bureaucrats and army officers executed over the course of nearly 20 years, some on charges of thinking disloyal thoughts. To keep order, Ming rulers revived the Confucian value system, which emphasized the need for each person to accept his or her place in the social order. Confucian values helped unify Ming China, but also locked the society into a rigid order. The Ming emperors worked hard to repair the damage the Mongols had done to their country. They restored China's irrigation systems, which had slipped into disrepair. They built the Grand Canal, which connected China's two major rivers, the Yangtze and the Huanghe, and allowed crops to be transported from south to north. They reformed the tax system by surveying lands under cultivation and then adjusting taxes to match production. Most farmers were small plots worked by individual families, and taxes on these families were reduced. By the late 1300s, the amount of land under cultivation increased. Over the next century, rice harvests were bountiful. Improved roads and waterways allowed farmers to get their products more easily to market, so they began growing profitable crops, such as tea, to sell. Market towns sprang up across the Ming Empire, and China's population soared. With cash flowing through the empire, non-agricultural industries flourished. Centuries earlier, the Chinese had invented porcelain, a ceramic as strong and thin as glass. Now, the use of new dyes, especially blue ones, allowed the Chinese to make even more spectacular pottery. The state set up huge imperial workshops to produce porcelain for sale abroad and at home, which gave rise to crowded, noisy, smoke-filled industrial cities. Ming artisans also produced rugs, lacquerware, silk, and later cotton cloth for export. The Ming emperors restored the traditional Chinese civil service exams that tested candidates' knowledge of Confucian classics. Candidates who scored high could enter government service. The Huangwu emperor's son moved to the capital from busy Nanjing in the south to the old Yan city of Dadu in the north. This new northern capital became known as Beijing. It remains the capital of China to this day. At the emperor's command, the Chinese rebuilt much of Beijing. At the heart of Beijing, artisans and laborers built a 9,000-room palace complex called the Forbidden City. Surrounded by walls and a moat, the Forbidden City was a private world set apart from the imperial court. Across its 178 acres spread temples, palaces, gardens, courtyards, carved stone bridges, and elaborate ceremonial halls. The main entrance to the Forbidden City, the Meridian Gate, was taller than a 12-story building. Even the greatest king must have felt small coming to see the Emperor of China. Inside, the city's 75 buildings all faced south, to the direction from which benevolent spirits were believed to come. Should evil forces make their way to the city, the emperor and his court had taken many precautions. On the ground, fearsome lions of gilded bronze stood guard. Carved dragons entwined themselves around columns, and on the rooftop sat fanciful earthenware creatures said to protect the city. At the heart of the Forbidden City stood the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where the emperor conducted important business. North of this building stretched the private quarters where the emperor's wives and children spent their lives. No commoners and very few foreigners ever stepped into the Forbidden City. Only a handful of exalted officials were allowed inside. The Forbidden City was the emperor's home, office, and retreat. Everything about it was designed to show the might of the emperor, the importance of the Ming Dynasty, and the insignificance of just about everything else. In the early 1400s, decades before Europeans would initiate an age of exploration, the Ming emperor who ruled China from the Forbidden City dispatched great fleets of sailing ships to explore distant lands. The most renowned explorer was a Muslim-born admiral named Zhang He, or Chong Hu, who had spent 20 years in the Chinese army. Over the course of about 3 decades, Chong Hu made 7 journeys, each lasting about 20 months. His fleet consisted of 62 enormous ships, about 225 smaller ones, and a crew of more than 27,000 men. Traveling with his fleet was like moving a small city across the waters. Chuang-Hu and his men made their way around Vietnam, through the islands known today as Indonesia, and around the tip of India. They explored the Persian Gulf, reached the Red Sea, traded with the Arabs at Aden, and finally sailed south along the African coast at least as far as Zanzibar. Everywhere they went, they dropped off Chinese wares and picked up local products for scholars to study. Chuang-Hu did not see these exchanges as trade, but as bestowing gifts and accepting tribute to the Ming emperor. From his 7 voyages, Chuang-Hu brought back visitors or captives from dozens of countries. Many presented the emperor with exotic gifts, such as ostriches, zebras, and giraffes. Chuang-Hu mapped the places he visited, but when he returned from his 7th voyage, a new emperor sat on the throne. This ruler wanted to return to the closed ways of the first Ming emperor. Not only did he dismantle the fleet, he also had the navigational charts burned so no one could retrace Chuang-Hu's journeys. The Ming emperors turned increasingly inward. They decided they did not need to explore faraway parts of the world. They came to distrust foreigners, whom they viewed as barbarians. Eventually, they even banned the construction of ocean-going ships and forbade their merchants from leaving Chinese waters. Although Chuang-Hu's explorations offered opportunities for trade with the world, Ming rulers were not interested in trade. Their Confucian values led them to look down on merchants. The Chuang-Hu emperor who founded the Ming dynasty came from peasant stock and wanted to base his emperor's prosperity on land and agriculture, not on trade. While China did sell silk and porcelain abroad during the Ming dynasty, it only accepted silver in exchange. The Chinese felt no need to buy or trade for any foreign products, but traders from foreign countries did want Chinese goods, and they came in increasing numbers. When Europeans arrived to trade in the early 1500s, Ming officials only allowed them to dock in a few port cities and refused to let them come inland. In 1514, a Portuguese ship docked in Guangzhou, which European traders called Canton. The Chinese called these rowdy Europeans devils, but eventually allowed them to set up a trading post on the island of Macau, not far from modern-day Hong Kong. In the mid-15th century, in response to the new Mongol raids in the north of China, Ming rulers undertook an odd project with new vigor. They began to rebuild the Great Wall. Back in the 3rd century BC, the Chinese had begun building walls to keep out invaders from the north to keep out invaders from the north. By the 1400s, many of these walls were in bad shape. When Mongols again threatened Chinese frontiers, the Ming decided to close the gaps in the Great Wall to make one continuous, impenetrable border against invasion from the north. They strengthened the old earthen structures with brick and granite, paved the top to support cavalry and cannons, and added watchtowers at regular intervals. Ming rulers used countless thousands of laborers to strengthen and extend the Great Wall during their reign. Eventually, the wall was some 1,500 miles long, running inland from the Yellow Sea along China's vulnerable frontier. It was one of the greatest engineering feats ever undertaken. While the Great Wall did keep the Mongols at bay, it also expressed the fundamental attitude of the Ming Dynasty, that China should be isolated, self-contained, and free from outside influences. The Ming Dynasty sought to shut China off from outsiders, but by the mid-16th century, European traders were forcing their way into China at will, and Japanese pirates were raiding its coastal cities. The empire's northeastern borders were under attack from a new group of foreigners, the Manchu. Internally, Ming rulers tried to suppress angry peasants who were rebelling against high taxes. In 1644, an army of rebellious peasants seized Beijing. In desperation, the Ming emperor hanged himself. His leading general appealed to the Manchu for help. The Manchu sent troops, but promptly declared themselves China's rulers and proclaimed a new dynasty, the Qing, meaning pure. As it turned out, the Qing would be China's last dynasty, ruling from 1644 until 1911. Once the Qing secured full control, they began collecting all unpaid taxes. Even if the family owed as little as a small fraction of an ounce of silver, the Qing collected it. They wanted their subjects to know that the new government would not let anyone get away with anything. Although the Qing were as foreign as the Mongols, they had been in contact with China for generations and had adopted many Chinese ways, including Chinese writing system and Confucian values. The Qing continued using the traditional Chinese civil service exams to select government officials. Native-born Chinese were not allowed to serve in the military, but they could take the civil service exams to obtain government jobs. By using China's traditional institutions to govern the country, roughly 1 million Manchu managed to control a nation of more than 150 million for more than 2 centuries. The first 4 Qing emperors kept China peaceful and prosperous for about a century and a half. During these years, a great demand for Chinese tea developed in Russia, Western Europe, and America. Europeans also imported porcelain rugs, jewelry, silk, and furniture from China. Americans eagerly bought Chinese unbleached cotton. All these exports brought silver into the empire and funded improvements in agriculture. In 1696, the Qing Emperor Guangxi crushed the Mongols in a decisive battle that ended the Mongol threat to China forever and extended the empire into new territory. In fact, China reached its greatest extent under the Qing, even larger than the country's modern-day borders. For all its prosperity and size, however, China was falling behind. In 1500, China had been ahead of Europe economically and technologically, but the Ming and Qing dynasties cut China off from the world, just as Europeans were beginning to make great advances in science. In the 19th century, China would suffer for the isolationist policies of its final 2 dynasties. Okay, so you want to go through and fill in anything you missed from our student guide. Lots of stuff that we covered as we were reading. And of course, you're going to fill in some information about Xionghu's travels. As we return back to our lesson, we're going to go ahead and move forward. We already explored the Forbidden City. Now it wants you to make sure that you take the 6.5 checkpoint, which is located right here. Once you complete that checkpoint, you will be able to move on, and we will discuss our next assignment when we return. When we return for our next lesson. So you want to make sure that you complete the exit ticket and then complete the 6.5 checkpoint. If you have questions, of course, reach out to me via K-mail so that I can help you with anything you didn't understand from this unit. Lastly, you need to make sure that you click on the exit ticket. You can copy and paste this or click right on it, however works for you from the YouTube video, and complete the exit survey so that you receive credit for your attendance. Thank you and have a wonderful day.